Third attempt at recording this, baby. What's up? It's me, TST Tom, and welcome back to the channel that calls itself a movie review channel, yet has only uploaded 2 movie reviews in the last 6 months. When I was younger, I was a really avid reader, and I'm still a pretty avid reader as of late. And I would always hear about different books that people were reading in school. I read the Harry Potter books, I read some of the Percy Jackson books, I read Animorphs, even though that was a little bit before my time. But I never read Artemis Fowl. I always thought, I won't read it, it's not that important, and it kind of left my mind for a long time. But then the movie came out, and so I decided to check out the books for myself because what I had heard about the books did sound really interesting, and I really liked them. I've read the first book, I'm reading the second book, and I really like them so far. I think it might be one of my favorite book series, in fact. The characters are interesting, the story is simple yet complex, it's well written, it's easy to read, the world building is excellent. I just really love this book series, I really do. And so I figured, people have talked about the movie being bad, but like, they can't do that much damage. They did. This is not a good movie. In fact, I think I'd probably go as far to say as this is the worst movie I've seen all year. Although, to be fair, I haven't seen a ton of movies this year. And I think it's personally a good thing that Disney pushed this to streaming, because if not, it would have been a bigger flop than Cats. But why, Thomas? Why is this film so horrendous, you may be asking? This review is not going to be very organized at all, but I do hope that you enjoy anyways. I think the best place to start is with Artemis himself. Now, I know that being a child actor is hard, and I'm not going to be blaming the actor for anything I'm about to say, but Artemis is just so annoying in this. The actor who plays Artemis Fowl in this is his first movie. I really hope that this doesn't follow him around for the rest of his life, because he seems like he's got an okay amount of talent most of the time. But, in the book, Artemis was a criminal mastermind, calm, cool, collected. He had a way out of every situation, but he was also a bit prideful and boastful, and so that was kind of his downfall. And he was obviously the villain. You still rooted for him, because he was very likable, despite being really unlikable. Artemis Fowl in the film is almost exactly the opposite. He's the most generic, Joseph Campbell-esque, hero's journey, magical YA protagonist imaginable. And you still want him to lose, because he's so annoying. One of the most annoying things is that the story keeps treating him like he's still the criminal mastermind that he was of the books, and by saying things like, I am Artemis Fowl, I'm a criminal mastermind. The kid was brilliant, but they never put that into effect. In the book, he figures out that fairies exist through sheer deduction. He manages to figure out all their rules. He manages to find basically their Bible, essentially, that tells him all the rules of their society, and he figures it all out on his own. In the movie, his dad figured it all out for him, and so all Artemis had to do was to figure out where his dad's journal was, which wasn't that hard because it was just based off of a poem his dad read to him every single night. His journal was just the same name as that poem. So in the movie, essentially Artemis Fowl's deduction skills aren't that much better than a librarian using a card catalog. Artemis is probably the most egregious example of character butchering in this film, but there are so many small little weird changes they made to other characters. Like, for example, Holly Short, the LAP recon officer that Artemis kidnaps, is made to look much younger in the film so they can force some kind of really creepy romantic angle. And in the book, she's described as having nut brown skin. That is not how she looks in the film. And she's a lot less tough. It's just a bunch of small things like that. They make all of the characters besides Artemis just flat, two-dimensional characters whose only motivation is to keep the plot going. And my poor boy, Foley. They did my boy Foley dirty, let me just tell you. But I could go on and on about the characters all I want. I think that what you're really here for is me talking about, what else? The story. This movie's story is very, very haphazard. A lot like this review, actually. It's very clear, based on what I've read of the second book, is that they're like picking and choosing plot elements from the second book and probably other books as well, and just shoving them into the story of the first book, overcomplicating it and making it much worse than it was. They took the villain setup from the second book and put them into this film, which doesn't make sense at all, because in the first book, Artemis is supposed to be the villain. And so, to counteract this, they have to change Artemis's motivation so that he's doing a noble thing. They change it so that instead of him wanting to get gold for his own personal use from the fairies, they're making it so he's trying to save his dad from the villain of the second book. And so the plot's already messed up by that, but the plot gets even more messed up with the introduction of the Aculos, which, as far as I can tell, does not show up in any of the other books. I could be wrong, but I feel like I'm not. And the Aculos is like the epitome of the MacGuffin. It's just a thing that they say, oh, it's really, really powerful. We can't let the villain get their hands on it. Oh, it's the source of all magic. It's just this all-powerful object that can do anything. It doesn't get explained at all. It's just there to be a MacGuffin. That's really all it is. In this story, Artemis's plan is so much worse. In the book, he kidnaps Holly Short and holds her for ransom so that the fairies will give him gold so that he can become rich. That's his whole plan. There's obviously a lot more nuance to it, like there's a lot of complicated things to stop them, but that's the gist of it. In the movie, his plan is, I know that my dad hid the Aculos in this house, so instead of looking for it like a normal person, I'm going to kidnap a fairy, which I'm not even sure are real, because for some reason he doesn't believe they exist in the movie.
Fairies. They're real.
And then hold them for ransom if they exist. Then the fairies will come and they'll send in a dwarf to get the fairy back, and then the dwarf will get distracted and find the Aculos for me. Why? Why can't you just look for it? I know your house is kind of big, but you can still look around your house for stuff. This movie's so bad. And so the villain is holding his dad hostage so that Artemis will give him the Aculos. That's their whole plan. It's like, oh, Artemis will get me the Aculos, you know, okay plan, but then Artemis does his whole crazy scheme, and then for some reason, and one of the things that the fairies can do is that they have this thing called the mesmer, where they can hypnotize people essentially just by looking at them and talking to them, unless you're wearing a pair of mirrored sunglasses like this. And so Artemis knows this, but then 2 minutes into that scene, he says, I want to trust you, and then he takes off his sunglasses and says, can I trust you? Artemis Fowl of the books would never take a risk like that. Why? The script just wants them to be friends so they can force the romantic angle in later sequels, I assume. You think that because he kidnapped Holly Short and held her hostage, she wouldn't like him anymore. But oh no, she punches him once and then they trust each other. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so then LEP sends in a troll that they captured earlier using a time freeze, which, by the way, this movie does not know how time freezes work in the Artemis Fowl books. It's a little bit more complex than it would be normally, but the movie just overcomplicates it way more. In the books, what a time freeze does is that it doesn't actually freeze everything inside. What it does is that it freezes the state of time. Like, say, if I were to put a time freeze around this house for the next 8 hours, it would still act like it was 1:29 in the afternoon while the rest of the world experienced it. And then when the time freeze stopped, it would jump to the current actual time it was being. But everyone could still move around in it, and like creatures could move around because it's time frozen, not people frozen. But then they do the exact opposite of that, and they just form like this weird Quicksilver scene in the beginning with this troll attack, and then later they try to somehow follow the same book rules while also following their older rules, and they justify it by saying, oh, we're just freezing the rest of the world. But then they still have people moving around outside the world, like Opal Kaboy and the LEP and everything. They don't know how time freezes work. That's a whole nother issue. And so then the villain's lackey, Kudgeon, who was not like that in the first book, performs a small mutiny and then takes over the mission and then sends in a troll on Opal's orders so that it can kill Artemis, I guess, which doesn't make sense because Opal wants the Aculos and wants Artemis to bring them the Aculos. I guess killing them will help. And so then they fight the troll, and then it lands on Butler, squishing him. And so then they have this drawn out like death fake out scene that they try to make you think with all their heart, like, please guys, he's really gonna die. I promise, he's going to die. I know you care so much. Yeah, Holly brings him back to life, and it's completely contrived. And then Root takes back control of the mission, and then the time freeze somehow blows up, and so then they all evacuate, and they make a big deal about like Artemis and Holly, whatever, they're gonna die inside. But then they don't. They don't even explain why they don't. They just say, oh, they don't. They're fine now. And so then Holly uses the Aculos to teleport Artemis Fowl Sr. to the Fowl Mansion, and then that everything's okay now. And Holly and Mulch are going to work with Artemis now to try and do things, I guess. And so then the whole framing device that they've explained of Mulch being arrested and talking to an interrogation officer about what's going on, they reveal that Artemis purposefully had Mulch arrested so that he would tell them about it, because I guess it would make sense for him to expose the entirety of the fairy world to the human world just on a whim, I guess. And then they just fly in on a helicopter, drop a ladder through the window, and pick Mulch up. Because why have more security on a secure prison where you're keeping high-profile criminals? They pick him up and they fly off into the sunset, and then the movie ends. All all I'm saying is that the ending of the book was exact opposite. The fairies still hated Artemis, but Artemis got what he wanted in the end. He was happy. The fairies were unhappy, but they got their officer back. It was all resolved. Mulch was still in prison. This movie's so frustrating, honestly. And if you thought the story was bad, the dialogue in this movie is absolutely terrible. When the dialogue is actually decent, it's stuff that's lifted straight from the books, like the scene at the beginning where Artemis is talking to a psychiatrist. That scene is pretty good because it's basically word for word what happened in the book. But then they sprinkle in little things of the therapist just basically explaining to the audience what Artemis's character is like, which is not in the books, because the book actually respects the audience and thinks that you can figure stuff out on your own without it being beaten into your head with a sledgehammer. But then when they actually do try to come up with original dialogue, it sucks.
Short used his magic to steal the Aculos from us, which, need I remind you, is the most precious artifact in our civilization.
You'll be sitting on 200,000 tons of molten lava, traveling at over 600 miles an hour. So, don't get out till I give the all clear. Otherwise, it's goodbye, Holly. Rest in pieces.
No need to sound so excited about it.
What can I say? I just love science.
Top of the morning.
Am I dead yet?
The worst part is when the dialogue is being outright awful, it's all telling the audience what's happening on screen. It's all telling the audience things. It's exposition galore. Show, not tell? What's that? We tell the audience everything and refuse to show them anything in this movie. Don't know where you're from. The movie drags and drags on so long. This movie is only an hour and a half, but it took me weeks to get through, and it felt like 4 hours in total. If you held a gun to my head and asked me to list a few good things that I did like about this movie, I will say that the cinematography and the CGI and whatever is okay for the most part. Oh, God. There was one joke that I did find kind of funny.
I'll need my gun.
That got a little chuckle out of me. I don't know if that was just from delirium or actual comedy value at that point. So yeah, Artemis Fowl sucks. And it's really sad, honestly, because this is a brilliant book. I really wish that Disney could have done them justice. And the thing is, this is a theme. This is what happened with Percy Jackson movies, and with Aragon, and with the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie. The big suits aren't going to look at this and think, we should do more to create more faithful adaptations in the future. No, they're going to think Artemis Fowl is not a bankable franchise. And then they're not going to make anything more. It took Percy Jackson 10 years to recover enough to get a rebooted Disney series, and that was with the author working on it. If you're a fan of the books, don't watch it unless you want to lose your sanity, and if you're not a fan of books, don't watch it if you don't want a confusing mess. And I'm going to be giving this movie a 3 out of 10. And that is the end of today's video. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I sincerely hope that I actually did make your day just that little bit better. Let me know down in the comments below if there are any other topics or movies or whatever that you want me to cover. Don't forget to like, share, and or subscribe. It really helps my channel continue to grow. And I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye.